You people never take care of anything. That's why this building is falling apart." Grant Lewis didn't even lower his voice when he said it. He stood in the hallway of the Harbor Pines apartments in Baltimore, Maryland, arms crossed, lips curled the way some men do when they think they own the whole world. His words hit the air hard and sharp, a slap louder than any hand. The fluorescent lights above flickered, as if even they were uncomfortable with what just came out of his mouth, and right there in front of apartment 2B, Mr. Isaiah Ike Coleman, 78 years old, paused with his hand still on the handle of his grocery cart. The cart was small, metal-scratched, one wheel wobbling just like him on days when his arthritis acted up. But he held himself upright with that quiet dignity familiar to so many black elders in this country. The kind of dignity earned, not borrowed. It was supposed to be an ordinary Thursday. Ike had walked 3 blocks to the corner store for milk, cornbread mix, and his favorite blueberry jam. The air smelled like crab boil from the seafood shack across the street, and kids were shouting about a basketball game somewhere in the courtyard. Normal things. Safe things. But the moment he turned the corner into his hallway, he saw it. His things. All of them. Dumped outside his door. Clothes spilling out of busted trash bags, his Sunday shoes tossed under the fire extinguisher box. The framed photo of his late wife glass shattered across the floor like ice shards, and his recliner, the one thing that kept his back pain in check, lying on its side with stuffing poking out the seam. It felt like the world tilted under his feet. Grant stood next to a rolling cart piled high with more of Ike's belongings. He had on a crisp windbreaker and brand new work gloves like he wanted to look official, but he wasn't city workers or maintenance. He was something worse, a landlord who believed power meant permission. "You can't just leave your junk inside a unit you don't pay enough for," Grant said, nudging a box with his boot. "Starting today, this floor is being renovated, and tenants who cause problems aren't part of the new plan." The emphasis on problems wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. Ike's throat tightened. He'd lived here 24 years, through break-ins, through mold in the hallway vents, through winters when the heat barely worked. Not once had he missed rent. Not once had he asked for special treatment. He raised his daughters here. He watched neighbors come and go, watched the building change owners 3 times. But he stayed, because this place, small as it was, held pieces of his life. "Grant," Ike said quietly, "you could have talked to me before doing all this?" Grant snorted. "Talk to you? About what? You think a conversation changes the kind of reputation old tenants like you bring to the place? Look around. Young professionals want to live here now. They don't want to see some old man dragging a beat-up cart down the hallway." A couple teenagers passing by looked up, frowned, and kept moving, too unsure, too scared to get involved. This city had taught them you could get in trouble real fast for defending the wrong person in the wrong moment. Inside Ike's chest, something gave way. Not anger, not yet. More like the sting of recognition. He'd felt it before, back when certain neighborhoods didn't want him walking on their sidewalks. Back when stores followed him around because they didn't want any trouble. Back when he returned from the army and realized the uniform didn't protect him from how some people saw his skin. He bent down slowly to pick up the picture frame of his wife, Marjorie, careful not to cut his fingers on the glass. Her smile still showed through the crack across her cheek. He wiped it with the sleeve of his jacket. "You didn't have to break my things," Ike murmured. Grant shrugged with a cold grin. Collateral damage. That was it. Those 2 words. They weren't loud, but they carried the weight of a hammer hitting something fragile. For a moment, the hallway was completely still, a kind of silence that doesn't just sit, it spreads, pulling the world tight around it. Ike straightened up, shoulders squared, eyes steady. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. Black elders like him learned long ago that power doesn't always need a raised voice to be heard. Instead, he laid the cracked photo gently on top of a box, reached into his pocket, and pulled out his old flip phone. The type most people would have thrown away years ago. He pressed a single contact. When the line picked up, he said only 2 words. "It's happening." Then he closed the phone, set it in his coat pocket, and looked at Grant with a calmness that made the younger man shift his weight without knowing why. Sometimes silence is louder than a scream. And in that hallway in Baltimore, it was about to speak. What Ike didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the phone call he made wasn't to family, neighbors, or police, but to someone whose arrival would flip the entire building upside down and turn Grant's easy eviction into the biggest mistake of his life. Grant didn't waste a second. The moment Ike dropped his phone back into his pocket, the landlord puffed his chest like he'd just won something. He grabbed one of the boxes labeled winter coats and shoved it farther down the hallway with his foot. "Let me help speed this up for you, old man," he said. "You got maybe 15 minutes before building security comes up here and makes this official." He said it loud on purpose, making sure anyone within earshot heard the word old the way he meant it, like weakness, like burden, like disposable. A few neighbors peeked out from their cracked-open doors. No one stepped forward. In Baltimore, people knew how fast a hallway argument could turn into a lawsuit, a police call, or worse. So they watched from the shadows, holding their breath, guilt mixing with fear. Grant motioned to the two contractors behind him, both wearing neon vests and heavy boots, to start hauling things toward the freight elevator. "Throw the broken stuff out," he told them. "Doesn't look worth keeping." One of the contractors lifted Ike's wooden toolbox, the one he'd carried since the late 70s, back when he worked maintenance at the shipyard. The man shook it roughly, hearing tools rattle inside, then started walking toward the stairwell. Ike stepped forward, not fast, not aggressive, but with the quiet urgency of someone who's lost enough in his lifetime. "Please put that down," he said. The contractor looked at Grant instead of Ike. Grant smirked and gave a tiny nod. The contractor shrugged and kept walking. That tiny moment, just a second or two, ignited something in the air. The kind of tension you don't see, but you feel under your skin. The kind that black folks recognize instantly because they've lived it 1,000 different ways. Ike's jaw tightened, but he didn't raise his voice. Instead, he reached down for the radio on the floor, the one Grant kicked earlier, and brushed off the dust. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the anger he refused to let explode. Grant chuckled, leaning against the wall. "You know, Elijah, people like you always act like the world owes you something. Like just because you've been around a long time, you deserve to stay somewhere forever. But this isn't the good old days. This is business." Ike looked up slowly. "The good old days." He let out a breath, short and sharp. "Son, the good old days weren't good for people who look like me." Grant waved him off as if swatting a fly. "Whatever, I'm not talking about race. Stop making everything about that." But the words he'd said earlier, the tone, the dismissiveness, the unspoken threat had already told the truth. Racism didn't always need slurs. Sometimes it only needed entitlement, dressed like authority. One of the teens from earlier, maybe 17, lingered near the stairwell, recording on his phone now. He adjusted the angle and muttered, "Man, this ain't right." Grant spun around. "Hey, delete that. You can't film here." "It's a hallway," the teen said under his breath. "Ain't your hallway." Grant took a step toward him. The teen backed up but didn't stop filming. The camera shook, catching the boxes strewn across the floor, the cracked photo frame, the fear, the injustice. The building's overhead speaker crackled to life with static. Then a voice female, out of breath. "Grant, what's going on up there?" "Someone just called the office saying you're throwing out a tenant's property." Grant pressed the hallway intercom button. "Handling a lease violation. Don't worry about it." Ike raised an eyebrow. He knew he hadn't violated anything. He also knew Grant didn't care. Grant turned back toward him. "Look, Elijah, you can argue all day, but end of it is, you're out. I sent the notice. It's done." "You taped a note to my door," Ike replied. "That's not a legal eviction." Grant shrugged. "Legal enough." Those two words again. That same twisted confidence. Ike looked at the wreckage around him, at the coat buttons scattered on the floor, at the pieces of photo frame glinting under the hallway lights, at the toolbox disappearing down the stairs. For a moment, the hurt in his chest pulsed so hard he had to steady himself on the wall. He had seen a lot in his life, marches, riots, the crushing weight of being dismissed because of the skin he was born in. He had survived things Grant couldn't imagine, but somehow, having his home, the last piece of stability he owned ripped apart by a man half his age, felt just as heavy, and yet his silence remained firm. A silence that said, "You think you know me. You think you know what I can't do. But you don't know who I called." Grant leaned in, voice low enough only Ike heard it. "You should have just moved out quietly, old man. Now you're gonna make this messy." Ike didn't move, didn't blink. "I didn't make this messy," he said softly. "You did." Somewhere in the distance down in the lobby, an elevator bell dinged sharply, a sound that would change the next 7 minutes of Grant Lewis's life forever. Just as Grant tightened his grip on control, the echo of approaching footsteps rolled up the stairwell. Slow, heavy, purposeful. Everyone froze. And in that charged silence, one truth settled over the hallway. Whoever was coming next wasn't here for Grant. They were here for Ike. For a long second, no one moved. The ding of the elevator downstairs echoed up the concrete stairwell, sharp and hollow, like a warning shot. Grant frowned, annoyed more than concerned, and wiped his gloves on his jeans. "What now?" he muttered, rolling his eyes. "Probably Amazon or something." But Ike knew better. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply adjusted his jacket and steadied the grocery cart beside him, waiting for the moment Grant finally realized the situation had shifted. The hallway felt tighter now, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. A neighbor from apartment 2F cracked her door open just an inch. Another stood at the opposite end, pretending to check her mailbox, but kept glancing over her shoulder. The teen with the phone stayed put, lens pointed straight at Grant, hand no longer shaking. Grant caught him still recording. "I said stop filming." The teen didn't budge. "Nah. Folks need to see this." That little sentence hit the hallway like a spark on dry grass. Grant took one step forward, chest rising. "I swear, Kid A, second elevator ding, cut him off." This time louder. Closer. Then the low rumble of firm footsteps. Several pairs, growing heavier with each stride down the first-floor corridor. The atmosphere shifted. Everyone felt it. Grant brushed it off with a scoff, but his fingers twitched. "You hear that, Elijah? Guess your ride's here. Maybe they'll help you pack." Ike didn't answer. He gently picked up his cracked photo frame from the top of the box, wiped the last of the dust from Marjorie's smiling face, and set it aside as if clearing space for what was coming. The footsteps reached the stairwell. Voices murmured, controlled, professional, nothing like the building staff. Leather soles on tile, suit fabric shifting, the distinct metallic click of clipboards or briefcases. Grant's eyes flicked toward the stairwell as 3 shadows appeared on the wall before the people themselves arrived. "You gotta be kidding me," he said, under his breath, but not quietly enough. Out from the stairwell emerged a tall black woman in a navy blazer, followed by 2 men in gray suits. Behind them came another Perron with a HUD badge clipped to his belt, the other wearing the logo of the Maryland Fair Housing Commission. Every neighbor who had been hiding behind their doors suddenly froze. The teen filming whispered, "Oh, damn," not in fear, but in awe. The woman in the navy blazer looked around calmly, taking in the mess on the floor, the scattered clothes, the broken frame, the trash bags, the elderly man standing still and silent beside his overturned belongings. She didn't look confused. She looked prepared. "Mr. Turner," she said, voice steady but warm. "We came as soon as we received your signal." Ike nodded once. "Thank you, Ms. Rowe." Grant blinked twice. "Signal? What signal?" Who are Ms. Rowe opened a binder thick with documents. "Elijah Turner is a founding member of the Midwest Senior Housing Justice Council. You attempted to forcibly remove him from his unit without following any legal procedure. That includes lack of written notice, failure to provide relocation options, and violation of Maryland Elder Tenant Protection statutes." The hued investigator stepped forward. "And based on the complaint filed this morning, your actions may also qualify as discriminatory treatment under federal housing law." Grant's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The contractors behind him froze mid-step, one still holding Ike's wooden toolbox like it suddenly weighed 100 pounds. The woman from 2F opened her door wider. Others stepped into the hallway now slowly, cautiously drawn by the sound of authority arriving like a tide coming in. The teen recording whispered, "Bro, they deep." Grant finally found his voice. "This is ridiculous. I'm the property manager. I have full authority to. Authority does not exempt you from the law," Ms. Rowe said, not raising her voice even a fraction. "And it certainly does not allow you to target an elderly tenant based on stereotypes or assumptions about his value." The words landed like a courtroom verdict. One of the attorneys beside her pulled out a stack of pre-printed forms. "Effective immediately, the management company is under investigation. All actions taken against Mr. Turner today are suspended. Any further interference may result in civil penalties." Grant's face drained. "You can't just..." The HUD investigator held up a small recorder. "Mr. Lewis, everything you say from this moment forward is being documented." A hush fell over the hallway. Ike didn't say a word. He didn't need to. For the first time since the chaos began, the power in the building shifted. Not loudly, not violently, but unmistakably. It moved like gravity finding its rightful place. Grant looked around, realizing the crowd had grown, realizing his voice wasn't the one people were listening to anymore. Realizing the old man he tried to push out wasn't alone. The teen lowered his phone just enough to whisper, "Yo." Mr. Ike brought backup for real. And below them, in the lobby, a second wave of footsteps approached, heavier, slower, more deliberate. The rest of the storm was coming. For a moment, the hallway felt like it was holding its breath. The air inside Harbor Pines apartments grew heavy, thick enough that even the people watching from behind cracked doors felt it press against their skin. The presence of Ms. Rowe and the HUD investigator had already flipped the power dynamic on its head, but whatever was coming up from the lobby carried a different kind of weight, a deeper one. Bootsteps, slow, firm, purposeful. Grant swallowed hard. "Who else did you call, old man?" Ike didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the stairwell, the same way someone watches a storm cloud roll in from across the bay, quiet, steady, certain. Then the first figure rounded the corner, a tall man, dark suit. Salt and pepper beard, posture sharp like he spent decades in courtrooms shaping laws instead of just reading them. Behind him came two more attorneys, one carrying a tablet already recording, the other flipping open a leather folio stuffed with forms and affidavits. The tall man stepped forward, scanning the hallway with a calm, assessing look that landed on Grant like a weight he couldn't shrug off. "Mr. Turner," the man said, voice smooth but edged with authority, "we reviewed your message. Everything checks out." Ike nodded respectfully. "Thank you for coming, David." Grant blinked twice. "David who?" The tall man turned toward him. "David Carver, Senior Counsel, Maryland Legal Defenders Alliance." Even the contractors holding Ike's things straightened up at the sound of the name. It meant something in Maryland. Carver handled housing discrimination cases like a surgeon handles a scalpel. Grant tried to stand taller, but the confidence was slipping out of him like air from a punctured tire. "This is unnecessary," Grant said, forcing a laugh. "This tenant was being evicted for cause. I have full authority from the property owner." Carver raised a brow. "Show me the notice of eviction you used." Grant pulled out a folded paper from his back pocket. Carver took it, unfolded it, looked at it for a single second, then handed it to Ms. Rowe. "That," Carver said, "is a grocery store receipt with the words, 'Move out,' written in pen." Someone down the hall snorted. The teen recording whispered, "Ain't no way bro did that." Carver wasn't done. Under Maryland law, every eviction requires a court order, a sheriff present, a writ of restitution, and 30 days' notice unless emergency conditions apply. Which, by the looks of this hallway, they do not. The HUD investigator tapped on his tablet. "We've already documented possible violations of Title VIII. And, Mr. Lewis, your building is part of a state subsidy program. Forced removal of a senior tenant without due process is a federal issue." Grant opened his mouth again, but Carver stepped closer, close enough that Grant had to tilt his head up. "You didn't just break the rules," Carver said quietly. "You ignored them, and you did it with an elderly black tenant who's lived here longer than you've been paying taxes." The hallway murmured again low, electric. But then came the moment when everything snapped into clarity. Carver turned to Ike. "Mr. Turner, do you want us to proceed with the emergency injunction?" Ike hesitated for just half a breath, not because he doubted what he deserved, but because he was a man who had lived long enough to understand the weight of decisions. He glanced around at the neighbors gathered, at the teen with the phone, at the broken frame on the floor, at the bags of clothing he'd packed with his own two hands. "Yes," he said quietly. "Let's proceed." Carver nodded once. Ms. Rowe handed the HUD investigator a form. The investigator handed a recorder to Carver. The second attorney began typing up a live affidavit. "You heard the man," Carver said. "Document everything." Grant backed up until his shoulder hit the wall. His voice cracked. "You can't take over my building?" "It's not your building today," Ms. Rowe said. "Not until the investigation concludes." The contractors exchanged nervous glances. One of them finally set Ike's toolbox down on the floor, carefully this time, as if afraid to make things worse. Grant sputtered. This is insane. He's just a tenant. Ike lifted his head. Not just anything, he said, voice low but steady. I'm a human being, and you don't get to throw me away. A hush fell again. This time, not out of fear, but out of respect. Even the people watching from their doorways straightened their backs, as if his words carried some invisible gravity that pulled them into alignment. The HUD investigator clicked his pen. Mr. Lewis, until further notice, you are required to cease all management actions, remove yourself from the premises, and make no further contact with Mr. Turner. Grant stared at the group attorneys, investigators, neighbors, cameras pointed at him from two directions, and he finally understood. He was outnumbered. He was outmatched. And for the first time since he strutted into that hallway, he wasn't in control. Down the hall, the elevator dinged again. Not a threat this time, not a warning. Just the sound of a chapter turning. And everyone knew Grant Lewis had no idea what the next page held. Hi, friend. Before we continue, I need your help. We've noticed the channel losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and helps us keep delivering great content for you. Your support means everything. Comment your city or country below. Let's see how far this community reaches. Thank you now. Back to the story. Grant didn't leave. He should have. Any reasonable person would have. But humiliation can twist a man into something reckless, and at that moment, Grant Lewis was a storm made of pride, panic, and bad decisions. He stood in the middle of the hallway, chest heaving, eyes darting between the attorneys, the HUD investigator, the neighbors watching, and Ike, who hadn't moved an inch except to place one protective hand on the old radio beside him. Grant jabbed a finger toward Ike. This is ridiculous. He's manipulating all of you. He's a tenant, an old tenant. I didn't do anything wrong. Ms. Rowe closed her binder with a soft snap that sounded louder than a courtroom gavel. You forced an elderly man out of his unit without cause, she said calmly. You destroyed or mishandled his property. You used language clearly indicating discriminatory motive. And you attempted to intimidate him while denying him appropriate process. Carver stepped up beside her. And most importantly, Mr. Lewis, you did it with witnesses. You did it on camera. And you did it while this building is under a federal subsidy program? Grant opened his mouth, but Carver raised a hand. Don't. Every word you say from here on out only strengthens our case. Behind them, the teen lowered his phone just enough to whisper to another neighbor, Yo, this man digging his own grave. The neighbor nodded, eyes wide, recording on her own phone now. Grant turned to the contractors. You two come on. Let's go. We don't have to listen to these people. But the contractors were already stepping back, hands raised slightly. Hey, we just do what we're told, one of them said. This ain't our fight. They slipped down the stairs so fast the echoes trailed behind them. Carver nodded toward Ms. Rowe. Proceed. She stepped closer to Grant, posture straight, voice professional but edged with steel. Mr. Lewis, until further investigation, you are legally required to vacate the building. You may not enter residential floors, interact with tenants, or handle any property belonging to Mr. Turner. Grant's face reddened, his voice rising. You don't get to tell me what I can do in my own building. It's not your building, the HUD investigator responded. Not anymore. And today, definitely not this hallway. Grant looked around at the neighbors. The phones pointed at him, the attorneys forming a quiet but powerful wall between him and Ike. He knew he'd been beaten. But instead of backing down, his voice cracked with something almost desperate. You're all ganging up on me because Carver cut him off before the sentence finished. Do not say it. For your sake. Something about that voice calm, certain, absolutely unimpressed, broke through whatever bluster Grant was clinging to. He clamped his jaw shut. The hallway went still. Ike finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. You think this is about race because you made it about race. I didn't call anyone today out of anger. I called them out of survival, because I've lived long enough to know what happens when men like you get away with things like this. Grant scoffed, but there was no real heat behind it anymore, just fear trying to disguise itself. Ike continued. You saw me as someone you could push around, someone too old, too tired, too alone to fight back. His gaze sharpened. But I'm not alone, not anymore. The teen whispered, Talk your talk, Mr. Ike. Carver stepped forward again. Mr. Turner, is there anything else you want documented before we finalize today's report? Ike looked down at the scattered belongings, clothes dumped like trash, photo frames cracked, the small ceramic dolphin his granddaughter made in art class lying chipped near the wall. Yes, he said. He knelt carefully, picked up the dolphin, and held it in his palm. Make sure you note the damage to this. It means more to me than the furniture. Ms. Rowe nodded respectfully. Documenting. Neighbors murmured softly, anger, sympathy, respect, all mixing in the space like a tide rising. Grant stared at the scene, bewildered that a man he assumed weak was reclaiming his power piece by piece. Then came the final blow. Carver held out a set of documents. Mr. Lewis, by the authority of the Maryland Legal Defenders Alliance and the HUD Oversight Team, you are hereby served with a temporary management suspension. You're to report to the building's owner and their counsel immediately. I'm being suspended? Grant stammered. Carver didn't blink. You're being removed from duty, effective right now. Grant looked at Icolder, smaller, standing with one hand on his grocery cart and the other holding the chipped dolphin, and somehow, in that moment, Ike looked 10 feet tall. Grant tried to find words. None came. He turned, walked toward the stairwell, and disappeared, the echo of his footsteps growing faint. The hallway watched him go. The silence he left behind wasn't fear anymore. It was justice settling into the space, quiet, steady, inevitable. The moment Grant's footsteps faded down the stairwell, something in the hallway shifted like a pressure valve releasing after being held too tight for too long. Conversations that had been whispered started turning into soft, steady words. Doors creaked open wider. People stepped into the light instead of hiding in the cracks. It wasn't fear anymore. It was relief, and something close to pride. Ms. Rowe walked over to Ike with the kind of care people reserve for someone who's weathered too much for one afternoon. Mr. Turner, we're going to restore everything exactly as it was before any of this happened. Our team will document, photograph, and file every damaged item for compensation. Ike nodded, tired but unbroken. Thank you. Carver motioned to one of the younger attorneys. Let's begin the item catalog. The young attorney knelt beside the spilled belongings, snapping photos of the cracked frame, the ripped bag, the overturned laundry basket. The teen who'd been recording earlier stepped forward, offering to help pick up the scattered things. I got you, Mr. Ike, he said quietly. Let me help put this back. Ike smiled, a small, grateful smile that softened the lines on his face. Thank you, son. It wasn't much just a teen helping an elder gather a few shirts, but in a black household, in a black neighborhood, those moments meant everything. Respect wasn't spoken, it was shown. The HUD investigator walked the length of the hallway, noting each witness who stepped forward with their own pieces of what they'd seen, who shoved, who kicked, who tried to warn Ike earlier, but was ignored. Their words built a story brick by brick. One Grant couldn't escape. The woman from 2F, the one who'd only cracked her door earlier, now stood beside Ike. Her voice trembled at first. I'm sorry I didn't say something earlier. I should have said something. Ike shook his head gently. You're saying something now. That's what matters. Ms. Rowe looked up from her paperwork. Your testimony helps tremendously. And all of you, she added, glancing down the hallway at the half-dozen neighbors now gathered. Your support sends a message. This doesn't happen in darkness anymore. Carver turned the conversation back to the legal process. Next step, Mr. Turner, we're filing for an emergency stay. You will not be moved. Not today, not tomorrow, not for the duration of the investigation. And after that? The teen asked. Carver's smile was cool and confident. After that, we hold people accountable. The weight of those words landed in the hallway with a thud. A couple of neighbors nodded, arms crossed, leaning against their door frames. One man older, tall, with gray in his beard, shook his head and muttered, This whole city's changing. Folks think they can just erase the people who built these streets. Glad somebody's fighting back. Ike heard him and lifted his gaze. They can build whatever they want, he said, but they can't build over us. That line traveled through the hallway like a current. Ms. Rowe cleared her throat gently. Mr. Turner, would you like to see your apartment before we move anything else? We need to assess what was disturbed inside. Ike hesitated. The doorway was only a few steps away, but it felt heavier than any weight he'd carried. He nodded and the group parted to let him through. The door swung open with a soft click. His home's mall, old and familiar, wasn't destroyed, but it had been rummaged through. Cupboards left open, drawers dumped out. His recliner had been dragged toward the door and dropped halfway. But everything was still there, just displaced, disrespected, disturbed. That hurt more than if they had actually broken something. Carver placed a hand on Ike's shoulder. "We'll restore all of this." Ike stepped inside slowly, touching the side table where Marjorie's second photo sat untouched. He exhaled a long, controlled breath. "I've lived here most of my life. I've seen this place fall apart and get rebuilt. But I've never seen someone treat me like I was. Nothing." "You're not nothing," Ms. Rowe said. "And that's the point." The teen stood hesitantly in the doorway. "Mr. Ike, why didn't you yell?" I would have yelled. Ike turned back toward him. "Because yelling lets them think they got to you. Silence makes them wonder what you know and who you know." The teen blinked. "Damn, that's deep." A few neighbors chuckled softly, tension easing. As Ms. Rowe and the HUD investigator continued documenting, Ike bent down and picked up the small ceramic dolphin his granddaughter made years ago, the one he'd cradled like gold in Part 5. He wiped away a smudge of dust and placed it on the shelf beside the framed photo of Marjorie. The two items, fragile, chipped, imperfect, sat together like symbols of a life lived through storms. Behind him, Carver approached with a clipboard. "Mr. Turner, I want to make something clear. What happened today won't be forgotten, and we're going to make sure it never happens to you or anyone else in this building again." Ike nodded, eyes glistening under the hallway light. "I appreciate that. Truly." He didn't cry. Black elders don't always let tears fall. But the emotion in his face was plain as day. Outside the apartment, more neighbors gathered, not out of curiosity now, but out of solidarity. A quiet line of people who'd watched him live, walk these halls, greet their kids, fix their door hinges for free, lend sugar, share stories, survive the city's toughest years. People he'd never call family, but who showed up like one anyway. Ms. Rowe closed her folder. "This isn't the end, Mr. Turner. This is the turning point." And for the first time that day, Ike believed her. The sun was beginning to dip behind the row of brick buildings across the street, casting a warm orange haze through the hallway windows of Harbor Pines apartments. The chaos had settled. The paperwork was signed. The evidence was logged. And the last of the investigators were packing their equipment as neighbors drifted back toward their doors in slow, hushed waves. But the energy wasn't gone. It had simply changed. Where fear once lived, something steadier took its place. A shared understanding that what happened today wasn't just about one man. It was about all of them. About every black elder who'd spent a lifetime holding communities together, only to be treated like they were invisible. Ike stood in his doorway, hands resting on the metal frame. His grocery cart sat beside him, still holding the milk and blueberry jam he bought earlier, like life itself had paused mid-sentence and waited for him to catch up. Carver approached him last, offering a firm handshake. "We'll keep you updated as things move forward. The case is strong, stronger than most." "I believe you," Ike said. "You showed up." Carver nodded. "You called." Ms. Rowe gave Ike a gentle smile. "Get some rest tonight. You've been through enough for a month." "Ma'am, I've been through enough for a lifetime." He chuckled softly, a tired sound with a hint of relief. "But I'm still here." The team filed out, leaving Ike standing alone for the first time since the storm began. The hallway lights hummed quietly above him. The scent of seafood from the street below drifted up through the cracked window. Somewhere, a TV played an old sitcom laugh track. Then came the neighbors. The woman from 2F handed him a plate covered with foil. "Fried chicken. Thought you might need dinner tonight." The older man with the gray beard clapped Ike on the back. "If you need help fixing anything they messed up, just holler." And the one who filmed everything, stepped forward, gripping his phone like it was a badge of honor. "Mr. Ike? That video's already blowing up online. People are mad. People are talking. They're behind you." Ike smiled at him, not with pride, but with gratitude. "Good. Maybe it'll help the next person." The teen nodded. "It will." The others slowly returned to their apartments, leaving Ike with one last sweeping glance at his hallway, a place that had witnessed fear, injustice, and then something close to redemption. He turned and stepped inside his home, setting the plate of food on the counter. He placed the cracked photo frame of Marjorie back on its usual table. He adjusted the chipped ceramic dolphin on the shelf. These weren't just things. They were memories that had survived another storm. He sat down in his recliner, letting it hold him like an old friend. Outside his door, the building felt different, stronger, more awake. And so did he. For the first time all day, Ike let himself breathe fully. A slow inhale, a longer exhale. The kind of breath a man takes when he knows he's not fighting alone anymore. He closed his eyes, letting the quiet settle around him. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of victory. A victory earned with dignity, patience, and the kind of resilience only a lifetime can teach. And as the last light faded into evening, one simple truth hung in the air. They tried to throw him away. Instead, he reminded them who he was and who he'd always been. Hi, friend. Thank you for listening to this story. Before you go, I need your help. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the channel. It's fast, free, and it helps us keep creating powerful stories like this. Also, drop a comment with your city or country so we can see how far this community reaches. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Your support means everything.